Hey, beautiful souls. Are you ready for a journey from heartbreak to hope? From the ashes of rejection to the flames of true love. Tonight, we're diving deep into a world where the moon decides your fate, where ancient bloodlines hold deadly secrets, and where sometimes the soul bond gets it devastatingly wrong the first time around. But I need you to buckle up because we're about to meet Aurelia Nightwhisper, a woman whose world is about to shatter in the most brutal way possible. She's powerless in a world that worships strength. She's invisible in a pack that only sees warriors and alphas. She's destined to be nothing until one midnight birthday ceremony changes absolutely everything. But here's what I want you to remember as we begin. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover who we're truly meant to become. Sometimes rejection isn't the end of our story, it's the beginning. Sometimes the person we're supposed to save is the one we love most, even when they've broken our hearts into pieces. This isn't just a story about a rejected mate. This is a story about a girl who discovers she's moonborn, blessed with ancient lunar magic that hasn't walked the earth in centuries. This is about an alpha king trapped in wolf form, slowly losing himself to a curse, desperately holding onto his humanity through the one bond he thought he'd destroyed. This is about two souls who were meant to shatter each other, until they realized they were meant to save each other instead. And buckle up, because the enemies are already circling. An immortal mage is collecting debts. A rival alpha wants to claim her as his weapon. Her own pack questions whether she's blessed or cursed. And the curse holding her mate prisoner grows stronger with every passing night. Destiny doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it whispers through the darkness. Sometimes it burns like moonfire beneath your skin. Sometimes it shows up as a white wolf with storm cloud eyes and a desperate love that refuses to die. Are you with me? Then let's step into the Silver Crest territory on the night that changed everything. On the night Aurelia Nightwhisper discovered that being powerless was just the beginning. That rejection was never her ending. That the mate bond, even when broken, could be the most powerful magic of all. The night the moon goddess herself decided to rewrite the rules of fate. Welcome to the Moonborn Luna, where prophecy bends to passion, where an omega rises to her true power, where a cursed king finds redemption in the arms of the girl he rejected. But let's begin. From rejection to redemption, from powerless to moonborn, from curse to salvation. Chapter 1. In the grand hall of the Silvercrest Pack, all eyes were fixed on a single figure, Aurelia Nightwhisper, in a simple dress and steady gaze, even though inside her heart trembled like never before. It was her 18th birthday night, the milestone when she could finally be recognized as an adult. And with it, the chance for destiny to reveal her destined mate. Silence cut through the air when the soul bond manifested, strong and undeniable, linking her to the man who ruled over all. Kael Stormborn, the Alpha. For a brief moment, hope shone in Aurelia's eyes, as if all the years of humiliation and contempt would finally be erased. But the illusion didn't last. Before all present, warriors, elders, entire families who awaited the spectacle, Kael rose from his makeshift throne and with a voice laden with authority declared that he would never accept that union. He rejected Aurelia publicly, calling her inadequate, incapable of being a leader's companion, reminding everyone that she was a wolf without powers, a shadow among the strong. The hall vibrated with murmurs and scornful looks. Some laughed, others shook their heads in disdain. For Aurelia, it was as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. Still, she raised her chin, refusing to cry before those who had always expected her downfall. With a firm voice, even though her soul bled, she responded only, "I accept your rejection, Alpha." The silence that followed was even crueler than Kael's words. He looked at her for an instant, and behind that cold gaze, there was something no one else perceived, a spark of conflict, almost as if he himself were a prisoner of the decision he had just made. But soon he turned his face away, and with a hand gesture, ordered, "Leave my presence." And so, under the weight of stares and muffled laughter, Aurelia Nightwhisper crossed the hall. For the pack, it was a spectacle of justice, the weak being put in their place. For her, it was the death of every dream she had dared to nurture. The heavy wooden doors closed behind her with a sound that echoed like a final verdict. Outside, the night air was crisp and unforgiving, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Aurelia walked through the courtyard with measured steps, her spine straight despite the tremor in her hands. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. The Nightwhisper estate stretched before her in shadows and moonlight, its ancient stone walls bearing witness to generations of wolves who had called this place home. Tonight, those same walls felt like a prison. Every window glowed with warm light from the celebration continuing inside. Every burst of laughter that drifted through the glass was another knife to her already wounded heart. She made her way to the gardens, where towering oaks created a canopy of darkness overhead. Here, finally alone, Aurelia allowed herself to breathe. The soul bond still thrummed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of what had been offered and then torn away. It felt like a live wire, sparking with each heartbeat, connecting her to someone who had just declared her unworthy. Inadequate, she whispered to the night, tasting the word like poison. Incapable. The words Kael had spoken weren't new. She had heard variations of them her entire life. Born without the ability to shift, she was an anomaly in a world where strength was measured by the size of your wolf and the sharpness of your claws. While other children learned to embrace their dual nature, Aurelia remained stubbornly, frustratingly human in form. But tonight had been different. Tonight, the moon goddess herself had spoken, weaving an unbreakable thread between Aurelia's soul and that of the most powerful alpha in the region. For one shining moment, she had believed that perhaps her worth wasn't determined by her ability to transform. Perhaps love, true, destined love, could transcend such limitations. How naive she had been. A rustling in the bushes made her tense, but it was only Lady Ravenna, the pack's elderly healer, emerging from the herb garden with a basket of night-blooming flowers. The old woman's eyes were kind but sad as she approached. "Child," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. "I felt your pain from across the grounds." Aurelia straightened, forcing her expression into something resembling composure. "I'm fine, Lady Ravenna. Just needed some air." The healer studied her with eyes that had seen too much heartbreak to be fooled by brave facades. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, dear one. Remember that in the dark days ahead." Before Aurelia could ask what she meant, Lady Ravenna had melted back into the shadows, leaving only the lingering scent of lavender and an ominous feeling that this night was just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple rejection. Inside the hall, the celebration continued without her. Through the tall windows, she could see Kael's imposing figure moving among his guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes as if nothing momentous had occurred, as if he hadn't just shattered the dreams of his destined mate in front of half the supernatural community. Kael Stormborn was everything an alpha should be. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the light and eyes like storm clouds. At 28, he had been leading the Silvercrest Pack for nearly a decade. Ever since his father's death in a territorial dispute, under his leadership, their territory had expanded, their influence had grown, and their enemies had learned to fear the very mention of his name. He was also, Aurelia realized with bitter clarity, a coward. The soul bond pulsed again, and for just a moment she felt an echo of something from his end. Regret, perhaps, or pain. But it was quickly smothered, buried beneath layers of duty and pride, and whatever other excuses he told himself to justify what he had done. "Miss Aurelia," she turned to find Theron Ashworth approaching, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. As Kael's beta and closest friend, Theron had been by the Alpha's side throughout the evening's events. Now, however, he looked deeply uncomfortable. "Theron," she acknowledged, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He stopped a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture she recognized as nervous habit. "I wanted to, that is, I felt I should," he struggled with the words, clearly out of his depth. What happened tonight was exactly what everyone expected. Aurelia finished for him. The weak wolf put in her place by the strong alpha. Nothing more, nothing less. That's not, Cedric started, then stopped himself. They both knew that arguing would change nothing. The rejection had been public, witnessed by dozens of pack members and visiting dignitaries. It was done. He had his reasons, Theron said finally, the words sounding hollow, even to his own ears. Aurelia laughed, a sound devoid of humor. I'm sure he did. The great Kael Stormborn always has his reasons. They stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Theron had always been kind to her, one of the few pack members who didn't treat her like a burden or an embarrassment. But even his kindness had limits, and they both knew where his loyalty ultimately lay. I should go, he said eventually. The Alpha will be wondering where I am. Of course, he will, Aurelia replied. Can't have the great leader wondering about anything for too long. Theron winced at the bitterness in her tone, but didn't argue. With a slight bow, a gesture of respect that felt more like pity, he turned and walked back toward the hall, leaving Aurelia alone once more with her thoughts and the relentless pulse of a bond that should have been her salvation, but had instead become her torment. The night grew colder as the hours passed, but Aurelia remained in the garden, unwilling to return to the house where she would have to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations. She had nowhere else to go. The Nightwhisper estate was her home, had been her entire world for as long as she could remember. Her parents had died when she was young, leaving her to be raised by the pack's collective charity. She had no money, no skills beyond basic household management, and no prospects beyond hoping someone might eventually take pity on her and offer marriage. That hope had died tonight along with everything else. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Aurelia finally made her way back to the house. The celebration had ended hours ago, leaving behind only the detritus of revelry. Empty glasses, scattered flower petals, and the lingering scent of too much wine and false cheer. Her small room on the third floor felt like a sanctuary after the ordeal of the evening. It was sparse but clean, furnished with a narrow bed, a simple dresser, and a window that looked out over the forest beyond the estate grounds. She had always loved that view, the way the trees seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon, promising freedom and adventure for those brave enough to seek it. Now, as she changed out of her dress and into a simple nightgown, Aurelia found herself wondering what lay beyond those trees. What kind of life might be possible for a wolf who couldn't shift, who had been rejected by her destined mate, who had nothing left to lose? The thought was both terrifying and oddly liberating. She was just settling into bed when a commotion erupted from somewhere below. Shouts, running footsteps, the sound of doors slamming. Aurelia rushed to her window and peered down into the courtyard where she could see pack members gathering in obvious distress. Something was wrong, very wrong. She threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, following the sounds of chaos to the main hall, where she had been humiliated just hours before. Now was filled with worried faces and urgent voices, all centered around Theron, who stood pale and shaken in the middle of the room. What's happening? She asked one of the younger pack members, a girl named Lissa, who had always been relatively friendly. Lissa turned to her with wide, frightened eyes. It's the Alpha, she whispered. He's gone. Gone. Aurelia's heart lurched. What do you mean gone? He went for a run after the party ended. That was 6 hours ago. Theron's voice carried across the room, drawing everyone's attention. We've searched everywhere. The usual trails, the territory borders, even the old hunting grounds. There's no sign of him. A chill ran down Aurelia's spine that had nothing to do with the early morning air. Alphas didn't just disappear. They were too powerful, too careful, too aware of their responsibilities to their pack. For Kael to vanish without a trace seemed impossible. Could he have been taken? Someone asked. An attack from a rival pack. Theron shook his head grimly. No signs of struggle, no foreign scent. It's like he just vanished. The soul bond, which had been a constant ache since the rejection, suddenly felt different, muted somehow, as if something was blocking the connection. Aurelia pressed a hand to her chest, trying to understand what she was feeling. "We need to organize search parties," Theron continued, taking charge in the absence of his alpha. "Cover every inch of our territory and beyond if necessary." "Someone must have seen something," another voice offered. As the pack mobilized around her, Aurelia remained frozen in place, a terrible certainty growing in her chest. Whatever had happened to Kael, whatever had caused him to disappear so completely, it was connected to last night, to the rejection, to the bond that still tied them together, despite his cruel words. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes," Lady Ravenna had said. "Remember that in the dark days ahead." Looking around at the frightened faces of her packmates, Aurelia realized that the dark days had already begun. Dear listener, if this story has awakened something within you, if you felt every heartbreak and triumph alongside our rejected Luna, then don't let this journey slip away. Subscribe now, because the next chapters hold the ultimate test, a mystery deepening, a curse taking hold, and a revelation that will shatter everything Aurelia thought she knew about herself and her destined mate. The mystery of Kael's disappearance unfolds, and you won't want to miss a single moment of what comes next. What happened in those forests beyond the estate? What force could take down an alpha? Subscribe and discover the truth alongside Aurelia, because the real story is only beginning, and the cliffhanger waiting for you will leave you breathless and demanding more. Chapter 2. The search continued for 3 days without success. Every trail was followed, every possible hiding place investigated, every neighboring pack contacted. Kael Stormborn, Alpha of the Silvercrest Pack, had simply vanished as if he had never existed at all. On the 4th day, as hope began to fade and whispers of succession started to circulate, something else appeared in the forest that bordered their territory. Something that would change everything once again. A wolf. But not just any wolf. This creature was massive, easily twice the size of even the largest pack member in their shifted form. Its fur was pure white like fresh snow under moonlight. And its eyes were the color of storm clouds, familiar and yet utterly wild. The white wolf appeared first to a hunting party led by Marcus Thornfield, one of the pack's senior warriors. According to his breathless report, the creature had emerged from the deep woods like a ghost, moving with a predator's grace despite its enormous size. It had watched them for several long moments before disappearing back into the shadows, leaving behind only massive paw prints and the lingering scent of something ancient and powerful. "It's not natural," Marcus insisted as he stood before the hastily assembled pack council. "No wolf grows that large, and those eyes, there was intelligence there, purpose." Theron, who had been struggling to maintain order in Kael's absence, looked haggard and overwhelmed. Did it show any aggression? Any sign of territorial behavior? None, Marcus admitted. If anything, it seemed curious, like it was studying us. The implications hung heavy in the air. A creature of that size and apparent intelligence could be a threat to the entire pack, especially in their current vulnerable state. Without their alpha, they were already struggling to maintain their position among the regional supernatural community. The last thing they needed was a mysterious predator stalking their territory. "We should hunt it," declared Elena Blackwood, one of the pack's more aggressive members. "Kill it before it becomes a real problem." "And if it's not just a wolf?" asked Dr. Sarah Chun, the pack's physician and one of their few voices of reason. "If it's something else entirely, we could be making a terrible mistake." The debate continued for hours with no clear resolution. Some wanted to hunt the creature, others preferred to wait and observe, and still others suggested abandoning the territory altogether until they could determine what they were dealing with. It was Aurelia who provided the answer, though not in any way she could have anticipated. She had been walking the forest paths that evening, as had become her habit since Kael's disappearance. The soul bond remained strangely muted, neither fully present nor completely severed, leaving her in a state of constant unease. The woods offered some measure of peace, a place where she could think without the weight of pitying stares and whispered conversations. She was following a deer trail deeper into the forest than she usually ventured when she heard it, a low, pained whine that seemed to come from somewhere ahead. Every instinct told her to turn back, to return to the safety of the estate, but something stronger compelled her forward. She found the white wolf in a small clearing, lying on its side with one massive paw caught in what looked like an old hunting trap. The metal teeth had bitten deep, and dark blood stained the pristine white fur. The creature's storm cloud eyes were clouded with pain, but when they fixed on Aurelia, she saw something that made her breath catch. Recognition. Not the simple awareness of one animal spotting another, but true recognition. As if this massive, impossible creature knew exactly who she was. "Oh," she whispered, taking a step closer despite every rational thought screaming at her to run. "You're hurt." The wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound of her voice, and it made another soft whine, almost as if it were trying to communicate. Aurelia found herself moving closer, drawn by an instinct she didn't understand. "It's okay," she murmured, the same tone she might use to calm a frightened child. "I'm not going to hurt you." She knelt beside the massive creature, acutely aware that it could kill her with a single swipe of its uninjured paws. But instead of aggression, she sensed only pain and a strange, desperate hope. The trap was old but well-made, designed to hold creatures much smaller than this wolf. The fact that it had caught such a massive animal spoke to either incredible bad luck or something else, something that suggested this wolf might not always have been quite so large. "This is going to hurt," Aurelia warned, reaching for the trap's release mechanism. "But I'll be as gentle as I can." The wolf's eyes never left her face as she worked, and she could swear she saw understanding there. When the trap finally released with a sharp click, the creature let out a sound that was part relief, part gratitude. Aurelia tore strips from her shirt to bind the wound, working with the careful precision Lady Ravenna had taught her during her informal lessons in healing. The wolf remained perfectly still throughout the process, as if it understood that she was trying to help. "There," she said finally, sitting back on her heels. "That should hold until it heals properly, but you need to stay off that paw for a few days." The wolf struggled to its feet, favoring the injured limb, but managing to stand. It was even more impressive upright, easily tall enough that its head reached Aurelia's shoulder, even with her standing. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, woman and wolf, in the fading light of evening. Then the creature did something that defied all logic and reason. It lowered its massive head and gently nuzzled Aurelia's hand, the gesture so tender and familiar that tears sprang to her eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered. But the wolf had already begun to limp away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Aurelia remained in the clearing long after the creature was gone, her mind reeling with questions and impossible possibilities. The soul bond, which had been muted for days, suddenly pulsed with warmth and something that felt almost like gratitude. As she finally made her way back to the estate, one thought echoed in her mind with growing certainty. The white wolf's appearance and Kael's disappearance were not coincidences. They were connected in ways she was only beginning to understand. And if she was right about what that connection might be, then everything, the rejection, the disappearance, the mysterious creature in the forest, was about to become infinitely more complicated. The pack would never believe her if she told them what she suspected. Hell, she barely believed it herself. But as she lay in bed that night, feeling the soul bond pulse with new life, Aurelia knew that her quiet, unremarkable existence was over. The real story was just beginning. The next morning brought chaos of a different sort. Word of Aurelia's encounter with the white wolf spread through the pack like wildfire, though she had told no one. Somehow Marcus Thornfield had picked up her scent in the forest, mingled with that of the mysterious creature, and had drawn his own conclusions. "She's been consorting with that thing," he announced to anyone who would listen. "The wolfless girl and the monster. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it?" Aurelia endured the stares and whispers with the same stoic dignity she had cultivated over years of being the pack's unwanted burden. But inside, anger burned bright and hot. They spoke of her as if she were a traitor, as if showing compassion to an injured creature was somehow evidence of dark intentions. "Is it true?" Theron asked her privately, cornering her in the estate's library, where she had sought refuge among the dusty volumes of pack history and supernatural lore. Aurelia looked up from the book she had been pretending to read, a treatise on ancient curses and their remedies that she had pulled from the shelf on impulse. "Is what true? Did you encounter the White Wolf?" She could lie. It would be easy enough, and Theron would probably believe her. But something in his expression, worry rather than accusation, made her choose honesty instead. "Yes," she said simply. "It was injured. I helped it." Theron's face went pale. "Aurelia, that creature could have killed you without a second thought. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that something was in pain and needed help," she replied, closing the book with more force than necessary. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Help those who are suffering? Not when those might be dangerous predators stalking our territory," Theron shot back. "We don't know what that thing is or what it wants." "It's a wolf," Aurelia said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. A very large wolf, but still just a wolf. Theron studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to read a particularly difficult text. "You don't believe that any more than I do." He was right, of course. The creature she had encountered was no ordinary wolf, no matter how much she might want to pretend otherwise. The intelligence in those storm cloud eyes, the way it had seemed to understand her words, the gentle nuzzle that had felt so achingly familiar. "What I believe doesn't matter," she said finally. "What matters is that it's injured and alone, just like—" She stopped herself before she could finish the thought. "Just like you." Theron's voice was gentler now, understanding dawning in his expression. Aurelia turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "I should get back to my duties." "Aurelia, wait." Theron's hand on her arm stopped her retreat. "I know things have been difficult since the Alpha's rejection, but putting yourself in danger isn't the answer, isn't it?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "What exactly do I have to lose, Theron? My position in the pack? My bright future as someone's charity case? My reputation?" "Your life," he said quietly. "You could lose your life." For a moment, the simple truth of his words hung between them. Then Aurelia gently pulled her arm free and walked away, leaving Theron alone among the books and the weight of unspoken fears. That evening, despite Theron's warnings and the pack's growing suspicion, Aurelia returned to the forest. She told herself it was just for a walk, just to clear her head after another day of hostile stares and whispered accusations. But deep down she knew she was hoping to see the White Wolf again. She found him. Increasingly, she was certain it was male, in the same clearing where she had freed him from the trap. He was lying beneath a massive oak tree, his injured paw stretched out before him, the makeshift bandage she had applied still in place, though somewhat worse for wear. When he saw her approaching, his ears pricked forward and his tail gave a single tentative wag. The gesture was so unexpectedly dog-like that Aurelia found herself smiling for the first time in days. "Hello again," she said softly, settling herself on a fallen log a few feet away. Close enough to talk, far enough to run if necessary, though she was beginning to doubt she would ever need to. The wolf's head tilted slightly, as if he were listening not just to her words, but to the tone beneath them. Those storm cloud eyes never left her face. And again, she was struck by the unsettling sense that he knew her. Truly knew her in ways that went beyond their brief encounter the night before. "Everyone thinks I'm crazy for helping you," she continued, finding it surprisingly easy to talk to this silent, attentive audience. "They think you're some kind of monster, that you're going to eat me, or worse." The wolf made a soft sound that might have been amusement if wolves were capable of such a thing. "But you're not, are you?" Aurelia leaned forward slightly, studying his face. "You're something else entirely, something familiar." At that word, the wolf's entire body went still. His eyes widened slightly, and for just a moment, Aurelia could swear she saw something very human looking back at her. "I know this sounds insane," she whispered, her heart pounding with the audacity of what she was about to say. "But sometimes when I look at you, I see—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the impossible suspicion that had been growing in her mind since their first encounter. Because if she was right, if the White Wolf was somehow connected to Kael's disappearance, then everything she thought she knew about her rejected mate was wrong. The wolf rose slowly to his feet, favoring his injured paw, but moving with surprising grace for such a massive creature. He approached her carefully, each step deliberate and measured, until he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Then, with infinite gentleness, he lowered his great head and rested it in her lap. The contact sent a shock through the soul bond that nearly knocked Aurelia from her perch on the log. Suddenly, the muted connection blazed to life, flooding her with emotions that weren't her own. Pain, longing, desperate hope, and underneath it all, a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "Kael," she breathed, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. The wolf, Kael, because she was certain now, despite the impossibility of it, pressed closer, a low whine escaping his throat. She could feel his anguish through the bond, his frustration at being unable to speak, to explain, to apologize for the cruel words he had spoken on her birthday. "What happened to you?" she whispered, her hands moving instinctively to stroke the soft fur of his massive head. "How is this possible?" But of course he couldn't answer. Whatever had transformed the proud Alpha into this magnificent but mute creature had also robbed him of his voice, his ability to shift back to human form, perhaps even his ability to think clearly. The intelligence was still there. She could see it in his eyes. But it was overlaid with something wild and primal that spoke of a mind slowly losing its grip on humanity. They sat together in the gathering darkness, woman and wolf, connected by a bond that transcended the physical transformation that had befallen him. Aurelia found herself talking, filling the silence with stories of her childhood, memories of the pack, anything to keep the connection alive and strong. "I used to watch you, she admitted as the first stars appeared overhead. "Even before the soul bond manifested. I would watch you during pack meetings, during the hunts, during the celebrations. You were so confident, so sure of your place in the world. I envied that." Kael's ears flicked at her words, and she felt a pulse of something through the bond. Surprise, perhaps, or regret. "I know why you rejected me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I understand the politics, the expectations. An alpha needs a strong Luna, someone who can shift, who can fight, who can bear strong children to carry on the bloodline. I'm none of those things." The wolf lifted his head from her lap and fixed her with an intense stare, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But it wasn't threatening. It was frustrated, as if he were trying to communicate something vital and failing. But this, Aurelia gestured to the space between them, to the bond that hummed with renewed life. "This doesn't care about politics or expectations. This is bigger than both of us, isn't it?" Kael's response was to gently nuzzle her cheek, the gesture so tender and intimate that tears sprang to her eyes. Through the bond, she felt his agreement, his desperate wish that he could take back the words he had spoken, the pain he had caused. "We'll figure this out," she promised, though she had no idea how. "Whatever happened to you, whatever caused this transformation, we'll find a way to reverse it." But even as she spoke the words, a chill ran down her spine. Because transformations like this, curses that could trap an alpha in wolf form, were the stuff of legends and nightmares. And if the stories were true, they were rarely broken by anything as simple as good intentions and determination. Chapter 3. As if sensing her growing fear, Kael pressed closer, offering what comfort he could in his current form. The gesture was so achingly familiar, so reminiscent of the man she had fallen in love with from afar, that Aurelia finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for the rejection that had shattered her heart, for the transformation that had stolen his voice, for the impossible situation they now found themselves in. But most of all, she wept for the love that had been denied its chance to bloom, trapped now behind the barrier of fur and fawn, and the growing wildness she could sense creeping into his mind. When her tears finally subsided, Kael was still there, solid and warm and real. Whatever else had changed, Whatever magic had wrought this transformation, the bond between them remained. It was damaged, complicated by pain and misunderstanding, but it was still there. "I should go," Aurelia said reluctantly as the night grew deeper. "If I'm gone too long, they'll send search parties." Kael whined softly, but didn't try to stop her as she rose from the log. Instead, he followed her to the edge of the clearing, his massive form moving silently through the underbrush. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He had nowhere else to go, no pack to return to, no home but the wild spaces between the trees. His response was a single solemn nod that was so human it made her heart ache. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," she promised, and turned to make her way back through the forest. Behind her, she heard a sound that might have been a howl, if howls could carry the weight of longing and love and desperate hope. It followed her all the way back to the estate, echoing in her heart long after the sound itself had faded. The next few days fell into a pattern that was both comforting and dangerous. Each evening, Aurelia would slip away from the estate and make her way to the clearing where Kael waited. She brought food when she could manage it, meat from the kitchen, bread from her own meals, anything that might help sustain his massive form. More importantly, she brought herself, her voice, her presence, her unwavering belief that somewhere inside the wolf was the man she had loved from afar for so many years. She talked to him about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears that she had never voiced to another living soul. In return, Kael offered what he could: silent companionship, gentle touches, and through the soul bond, emotions that spoke louder than words ever could. She felt his gratitude for her care, his amazement at her courage, his growing desperation as the wild part of his nature grew stronger with each passing day. Because that was the terrifying truth neither of them could ignore. He was losing himself each night. It took him longer to recognize her, longer to push past the animal instincts that urged him to flee or fight. The intelligence in his eyes remained, but was increasingly overlaid with something feral and untamed. "We're running out of time," Aurelia whispered on the fifth night, her hands buried in his thick fur as he lay with his head in her lap. "Whatever this is, whatever's happening to you, it's getting worse." Kael's only response was a low whine, but through the bond, she felt his agreement and his fear. He was afraid of what he might become, afraid of what he might do if the wolf completely overtook the man. "There has to be something," Aurelia continued, her voice growing more determined. "Some way to break this curse, some magic that can bring you back." She had been reading everything she could find in the estate's library, searching for any reference to transformations like Kael's. Most of what she found was folklore and legend, stories of witches and curses and impossible bargains. But buried among the fairy tales, she had found hints of something more substantial. References to ancient magic, to prices paid and debts owed, to transformations that could only be undone by meeting specific conditions. The problem was that none of the sources agreed on what those conditions might be. "I won't give up," she promised him, and felt his gratitude wash over her through the bond. "No matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, I'll find a way to bring you back." But even as she spoke the words, Aurelia couldn't shake the feeling that time was a luxury they didn't have. Each day that passed saw Kael slipping further away from his human self, and she was no closer to understanding the magic that held him prisoner. Worse, the pack was growing increasingly suspicious of her frequent absences. Theron had questioned her twice more, and she could see the worry in his eyes growing deeper each time. How long before worry turned to action? How long before they decided that her connection to the mysterious white wolf made her a threat to be eliminated? As she made her way back to the estate that night, Aurelia's mind raced with plans and possibilities. She needed help, needed someone with knowledge of magic and curses, and the kind of ancient power that could transform an alpha into a beast. But who could she trust with such a dangerous secret? The answer came to her as she slipped through the estate's gardens, past the herb plots where Lady Ravenna grew her healing plants. The old healer had always been kind to her, had always seemed to know more than she let on about the supernatural world beyond the pack's borders. More importantly, she had been the one to speak of the moon goddess and her lack of mistakes. Perhaps she had known even then that Aurelia's story was far from over. It was a risk. Trusting anyone with the truth about Kael's transformation could lead to disaster for both of them. But as Aurelia climbed the stairs to her small room, she realized that the greater risk lay in trying to solve this mystery alone. Tomorrow she would seek out Lady Ravenna and pray that the old woman's wisdom extended to matters of magic and curses. Because if it didn't, if there truly was no way to break the spell that held Kael prisoner, then she would have to watch the man she loved disappear forever into the wild heart of the beast. And that, Aurelia knew with absolute certainty, was a fate she would not accept. Not without a fight. Lady Ravenna's cottage sat at the edge of the estate grounds, a small stone building covered in climbing roses and surrounded by the most extensive herb garden in 3 counties. The old healer had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, tending to the pack's injuries and ailments with a combination of traditional medicine and what some whispered was something more mystical. Aurelia approached the cottage the next morning with her heart hammering against her ribs. The decision to confide in Lady Ravenna felt both inevitable and terrifying. Inevitable because she desperately needed help. Terrifying because once the words were spoken, there would be no taking them back. She found the elderly woman in her garden, carefully harvesting moonflower petals that only bloomed in the pre-dawn hours. Lady Ravenna looked up as Aurelia approached, her weathered face creasing into a knowing smile that made Aurelia wonder if her secrets were as transparent as she feared. "Child," Lady Ravenna said softly, her voice carrying the same gentle authority it had held the night of Aurelia's rejection. "You look like someone carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." "Lady Ravenna," Aurelia began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the impossible truth she had discovered. "I need to ask you about something that might sound unbelievable." The old woman's hands stilled on the delicate flowers, and when she looked up, her eyes held a depth of understanding that took Aurelia's breath away. "Unbelievable things have a way of being the most true, dear one. Come inside and tell me what troubles you." The cottage's interior was exactly what Aurelia had expected. Low, beamed ceilings, dried herbs hanging in bundles from every available surface, and shelves lined with bottles containing mysterious liquids in every color imaginable. But what she hadn't expected was the sense of power that seemed to emanate from the very walls, a thrumming energy that spoke of magic far older and deeper than anything she had imagined. Lady Ravenna gestured for her to sit at a small wooden table while she prepared tea with practiced efficiency. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged with anticipation, until finally the old woman settled across from her with 2 steaming cups. "Now then," Lady Ravenna said, her eyes fixed on Aurelia's face with uncomfortable intensity. "Tell me about the White Wolf." Aurelia's cup rattled against its saucer as her hands trembled. "How did you—" "Child, I've been watching over this pack for more years than you've been alive," Lady Ravenna replied. "I know when something supernatural walks among us, just as I know when someone is carrying secrets that could change everything." Lady Ravenna's voice was gentle but firm. "The question is whether you trust me enough to share those secrets." For a moment, Aurelia wavered on the edge of confession. Then she thought of Kael alone in the forest, fighting a losing battle against the wildness that threatened to consume him entirely. And the decision made itself. "The White Wolf," she said quietly, "is Kael." Lady Ravenna's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, but confirmation of suspicion she had already harbored. "You're certain?" Lady Ravenna stated more than asked. "The soul bond," Aurelia explained, her words coming faster now that the dam had broken. "It was muted after his disappearance, but when I touched the wolf, it blazed back to life. I can feel him, Lady Ravenna. I can feel his emotions, his thoughts, his desperation to communicate. It's him, somehow transformed into that creature." "A curse," Lady Ravenna murmured, more to herself than to Aurelia. "I wonder when he vanished so completely. Alphas don't simply disappear, not without leaving some trace behind." You know about curses? Hope flared in Aurelia's chest. You know how to break them? The old woman was quiet for a long moment. Her gnarled fingers wrapped around her teacup as she stared into its depths as if seeking answers in the swirling liquid. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made Aurelia's heart sink. Curses of this magnitude, transformations that can trap an alpha in animal form, are not common, child. They require tremendous power and specific conditions to cast, and they are notoriously difficult to break. But not impossible, Aurelia pressed. Not impossible, Lady Ravenna agreed. But dangerous. The kind of magic that could do this to someone as powerful as Kael. It comes with a price, and breaking it will likely require an even greater price. Aurelia thought of the growing wildness she sensed in Kael each night, the way his human consciousness seemed to slip a little further away with each passing day. What kind of price? She asked. That depends on the nature of the curse itself, Lady Ravenna replied. Some require great sacrifice, a life for a life, love for love. Others demand the completion of specific tasks or the solving of riddles. Still others can only be broken by the one who cast them. Then we need to find out who did this to him, Aurelia said, her voice growing stronger with determination. And why? Lady Ravenna studied her for a long moment, and Aurelia had the uncomfortable feeling that the old woman was seeing far more than she was revealing. That may be more dangerous than you realize, child. Whoever has the power to curse an alpha is not someone to be trifled with. I don't care about the danger, Aurelia replied fiercely. I won't let him disappear into that wolf forever. I won't let him lose himself completely. Even though he rejected you, Lady Ravenna's question was gentle but pointed. Even though he chose duty over love, pride over the bond the moon goddess herself forged between you. The words hit like physical blows, but Aurelia didn't flinch, especially because of that. He made his choice based on what he thought was best for the pack, for his position as alpha. But this curse, it's stealing that choice away from him. It's stealing everything that makes him who he is. Lady Ravenna nodded slowly, and for the first time since Aurelia had begun her confession, the old woman smiled. You have grown strong, dear one. Stronger than anyone realizes, I think. Will you help me? Aurelia asked. Will you help me find a way to break this curse? I will do what I can, Lady Ravenna promised. But first, we need to learn more about the curse itself. You say you can feel him through the soul bond. Can you sense anything else? Any clues about what was done to him, or who might have done it? Aurelia closed her eyes, reaching out through the connection that tied her to Kael. Even now, in the bright light of morning, she could feel him in the forest, restless and increasingly agitated as the human part of his mind struggled against animal instincts. Pain, she said softly. Not physical pain, but something deeper. Guilt maybe, or regret. And underneath that, she frowned, trying to parse the complex tangle of emotions flowing through the bond. Anger, not at me, but at himself. And fear. He's terrified of what he might become, what he might do if he loses control completely. Anything else? Lady Ravenna prompted. Any images? Any sense of when or where the transformation occurred? Aurelia concentrated harder, pushing deeper into the connection than she had ever dared before. For a moment, she felt Kael's consciousness brush against hers, and through his memories, she caught a glimpse of something that made her gasp. A man, she whispered, her eyes snapping open. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes like winter storms. He was beautiful, but in a cold way, dangerous and old. Not in body, but in spirit. Ancient. Lady Ravenna's face had gone pale. Did you see where this encounter took place? The old woman asked. The old stone circle, Aurelia replied, the image still vivid in her mind. The one deep in the forest where the pack used to hold ceremonies before the new hall was built. Adrian, Lady Ravenna breathed, and the name seemed to carry a weight that made the very air in the cottage grow heavy. You know him? I know of him, the old woman corrected grimly. Adrian Blackthorn, though he's gone by many names over the centuries. He's a mage, immortal and powerful beyond measure. And if he's the one who cursed Kael, she trailed off, shaking her head. What? Aurelia demanded. What aren't you telling me? Lady Ravenna met her eyes, and in them, Aurelia saw a fear that chilled her to the bone. Adrian doesn't curse people randomly, child. He's methodical, calculating. If he transformed Kael, it was for a specific purpose. And that purpose likely involves you. The words hit Aurelia like a physical blow. Me? But why? I'm nobody. Nothing special. I can't even shift. Can't you? Lady Ravenna asked quietly. Or have you simply never had reason to try? Before Aurelia could process that cryptic statement, a commotion erupted outside the cottage. Shouts, running footsteps, the sound of horses being saddled in haste. Both women rushed to the window where they could see pack members gathering in the courtyard, their faces grim with purpose. What's happening? Aurelia asked. But even as the words left her mouth, she caught sight of Theron striding toward the cottage, his expression darker than she had ever seen it. Stay here, Lady Ravenna instructed. But Aurelia was already moving toward the door. She met Theron halfway across the garden, her heart pounding with sudden dread. What's wrong? What's happened? She asked. Magnus Ironwood has sent an envoy, Theron replied, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He's demanding a meeting with our leadership to discuss the unfortunate situation of our missing Alpha. Aurelia's blood ran cold. Magnus Ironwood was the Alpha of the neighboring Ironwood pack, a man known for his ruthless ambition and his talent for exploiting weakness in others. If he was making overtures now, when the Silvercrest pack was at its most vulnerable, trouble was coming. He's going to try to absorb our territory, she said, the political implications hitting her like a sledgehammer. Worse, Theron replied grimly. He's going to offer protection in exchange for submission. And with Kael gone and no clear successor, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew how desperate the pack situation had become. When is this meeting? Aurelia asked. Tomorrow night, full moon. Theron's expression grew even darker. He's making a statement, choosing that timing, showing that he's not afraid of our pack's traditional power. Aurelia's mind raced. Tomorrow night was when the pack would be at its strongest, when even she might be able to access whatever dormant abilities Lady Ravenna seemed to think she possessed. But it was also when Kael would be at his most vulnerable, when the wolf's instincts would be at their peak, and his human consciousness at its weakest. I need to go, she said suddenly, turning back toward the cottage. Aurelia, wait, Theron called after her, but she was already pushing through the door. Lady Ravenna was waiting for her, a leather-bound book open on the table, and several bottles of mysterious substances arranged beside it. I heard, the old woman said simply, and I think I may have found something that can help. What is it? Aurelia asked, moving to peer over the healer's shoulder at the ancient text. A protection ritual, Lady Ravenna explained, pointing to a passage written in a language Aurelia didn't recognize. It won't break Kael's curse, but it might strengthen the bond between you. Help him maintain his human consciousness even in wolf form. What do I need to do? Lady Ravenna's expression was grave. It requires a blood offering freely given, and it must be performed under the full moon. But Aurelia, you need to understand, this ritual will tie you to him even more deeply than the soul bond already has. If something happens to him, if he's killed, or if the curse consumes him completely, it could destroy you as well. Aurelia didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Child, think carefully, Lady Ravenna urged. I said I'll do it, Aurelia repeated firmly. Whatever the risk, whatever the cost, I won't let him face this alone. Lady Ravenna studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But first, there's something else you need to know. Something about your own nature that may be crucial to breaking Kael's curse. What do you mean? The old woman asked. The old woman closed the book and fixed Aurelia with an intense stare. You said you can't shift, that you have no wolf form. But that's not entirely true, is it? You've never tried to shift during a full moon. Never pushed yourself to the breaking point where transformation becomes inevitable. Because I can't, Aurelia protested. I've known since I was a child that I'm different, that I don't have that ability. Or because you've been suppressing it, Lady Ravenna countered. Tell me, child, have you ever felt anything during the full moon? Any stirring, Any sense of something trying to break free? Aurelia opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Because now that the old woman mentioned it, there had been times, moments during the most powerful full moons, when she had felt something stirring deep inside her, something wild and powerful that she had always pushed down, always ignored. I thought it was just wishful thinking, she admitted quietly. It wasn't, Lady Ravenna said with certainty. You have a wolf, Aurelia, but it's been bound, suppressed by magic so old and powerful that even you don't remember it being cast. Aurelia's world tilted on its axis. Bound by who? Why? That, Lady Ravenna said grimly, is what we need to find out. Because I suspect that your binding and Kael's curse are connected in ways we're only beginning to understand. Beautiful soul, if you're feeling the pull of this journey, if Aurelia's transformation is stirring something in your own heart, then subscribe now, because what's coming next will test everything she's learned. The truth about her hidden nature is about to be unveiled. A protection ritual will bind her fate to Kael's in ways she cannot imagine, and Magnus Ironwood's dark ambitions are about to collide with forces he never anticipated. The real battle hasn't even begun, and you won't miss a single moment of what happens when secrets are revealed and power awakens. Hit that subscribe button, and let's walk together into the storm that's gathering on the horizon, because the climax is closer than you think, and destiny itself hangs in the balance. Chapter 4. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and growing tension. Lady Ravenna sent Aurelia home with a list of items needed for the protection ritual. Silver thread, white candles, herbs that had been blessed under previous full moons, and a small silver knife that had belonged to her mother. The old woman also gave strict instructions to avoid the forest until nightfall. The last thing they needed was for Aurelia to be discovered with the white wolf before they could strengthen the bond between them. But staying away proved nearly impossible. The soul bond pulled at her constantly, filled with Kael's growing agitation. As the full moon approached, she could feel his struggle to maintain control, his fear of what he might become when the moon reached its peak. The pack's mood grew increasingly dark as the day wore on. Magnus' envoy had delivered his message with barely concealed smugness, making it clear that the Ironwood Alpha viewed the Silver Crest pack situation as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. The meeting tomorrow night would be a formality. Magnus would offer his protection in exchange for submission, and with no Alpha to refuse him, the pack would have little choice but to accept. There has to be another way, Aurelia overheard one of the younger pack members saying as she passed through the main hall. Some way to maintain our independence until the Alpha returns. If he returns, came the bitter reply. Face it, Marcus. He's been gone for over a week. If he were coming back, he would have done so by now. Aurelia wanted to scream at them, to tell them that their Alpha was closer than they knew, that he was fighting a battle far more dangerous than any territorial dispute. But she held her tongue, knowing that the truth would only make things worse. As evening approached, she made her way to Lady Ravenna's cottage with a bag containing the items needed for the ritual: silver thread, white candles, herbs that had been blessed under previous full moons, and a small silver knife that had belonged to her mother. The old woman was waiting for her, dressed in robes that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. "Are you ready?" Lady Ravenna asked, and Aurelia nodded, though her heart was hammering with nervous energy. They made their way into the forest as the sun set, following paths that Aurelia had never seen before. Lady Ravenna moved with surprising agility for her age, leading them deeper into the woods than Aurelia had ever ventured. The trees here were older, their trunks massive and gnarled with age, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even the approaching moonlight barely penetrated. "Where are we going?" Aurelia asked as they climbed a steep hill covered in ancient oaks. "To a place of power," Lady Ravenna replied. "The ritual must be performed on sacred ground, where the veil between worlds is thin." They emerged into a clearing at the top of the hill, and Aurelia gasped. The space was dominated by a circle of standing stones, each one taller than a man and covered in symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. This wasn't the stone circle where Kael had encountered Adrian. This was something far older, far more powerful. "What is this place?" Aurelia whispered, awed by the sense of ancient magic that permeated the air. "The heart of the old magic," Lady Ravenna replied, beginning to unpack the ritual supplies. "Built by the first wolves to settle in this region, blessed by generations of moon ceremonies and pact bonds." As if summoned by their arrival, a massive white shape emerged from the treeline. Kael approached slowly, his storm cloud eyes fixed on Aurelia with an intensity that made her breath catch. Even in wolf form, she could see the struggle playing out behind his gaze. The man fighting to maintain control as the full moon's power grew stronger. "He knows," Lady Ravenna observed, watching as Kael settled himself at the edge of the stone circle. "Some part of him understands what we're trying to do." The ritual itself was both simpler and more complex than Aurelia had expected. Lady Ravenna arranged the candles in a specific pattern around the central stone, then used the silver thread to create an intricate web connecting each flame. The herbs were burned in a small brazier, filling the air with smoke that seemed to shimmer and dance in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Now," Lady Ravenna said, offering Aurelia the silver knife. A single drop of blood on the central stone, freely given with the intention of strengthening the bond between you and your mate. Aurelia took the knife with steady hands, though her heart was racing. The blade was sharp, cutting through her palm with barely any pressure. Dark blood welled up, and she let a single drop fall onto the ancient stone. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The stone's circle blazed with silver light, and the soul bond between her and Kael exploded into brilliant life. She felt his consciousness rush toward hers, no longer muted or distant, but blazing with desperate relief and love so fierce it nearly knocked her to her knees. Through the bond, she felt his gratitude, his amazement at her courage, his desperate hope that this might be the beginning of a way back to his human form. But underneath it all, she sensed something else, a darkness that spoke of the curse's true nature and the terrible price that would be required to break it. The light faded gradually, leaving them in the gentle glow of the full moon. Kael had moved closer during the ritual, and now he sat just outside the stone circle, his massive head tilted, as if listening to something only he could hear. "It's done," Lady Ravenna said softly. "The bond is stronger now, more resilient. He should be able to maintain his human consciousness even when the wolf's instincts are at their strongest." Aurelia could feel the truth of those words through the connection that now hummed between them like a living thing. Kael's thoughts were clearer, more focused, though still overlaid with the constant struggle against his animal nature. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed inadequate for what the old woman had done. "Don't thank me yet," Lady Ravenna replied grimly. "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow night, when Magnus comes calling, you'll need every advantage you can get." "What do you mean?" Aurelia asked, but Lady Ravenna was already gathering the ritual supplies, her expression closed and unreadable. "Get some rest, child. Tomorrow will bring challenges you can't yet imagine." As they made their way back through the forest, Kael followed at a distance, his presence a comforting weight through the strengthened bond. Aurelia could feel his thoughts more clearly now, his desperate wish that he could speak, could explain what had happened to him, and warn her of the dangers ahead. Because through the connection, she sensed that Magnus' arrival was only the beginning. The curse that held Kael prisoner was part of something larger, something that threatened not just their pack, but the entire supernatural community. But for tonight, it was enough that Kael's consciousness remained intact, that the bond between them burned bright and strong despite the magic that kept them apart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new impossible choices. Tonight, they had each other. And for now, that would have to be enough. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, as if the very sky reflected the pack's growing unease. Aurelia woke to find the strengthened soul bond humming with Kael's presence, his consciousness clearer and more focused than it had been since his transformation. Through their connection, she could feel his awareness of the approaching confrontation with Magnus, his frustration at being unable to protect his pack in their hour of need. The estate buzzed with nervous energy as pack members prepared for the evening's meeting. Warriors sharpened weapons they hoped they wouldn't need to use, while the elders huddled in worried conferences about the pack's dwindling options. Without an alpha to lead them, they were vulnerable in ways that went far beyond simple politics. Aurelia moved through the preparations like a ghost, helping where she could, but feeling increasingly isolated by the secret she carried. Every time someone mentioned Kael's disappearance, every time she heard speculation about what might have happened to him, she wanted to scream the truth. But she held her tongue, knowing that revealing his transformation would only make things worse. "You look terrible," Theron observed, cornering her in the kitchen where she was helping prepare food for the evening's gathering. "When was the last time you slept?" "I'm fine," Aurelia replied automatically, though she knew she looked anything but. The ritual had taken more out of her than she had expected, and the constant awareness of Kael's struggle was wearing on her nerves. Theron studied her with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "This has something to do with that wolf, doesn't it? The one you've been visiting in the forest." Aurelia's hand stilled on the bread she was slicing. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, Aurelia," Theron said quietly. "I've been tracking your movements, following your scent trails. You've been meeting with that creature almost every night since it appeared." For a moment, Aurelia considered telling him everything. Theron had been Kael's closest friend and most trusted advisor. If anyone could be trusted with the truth, it would be him. But the risk was too great. If Theron didn't believe her, if he thought the stress of rejection had driven her to delusion, he might have her confined for her own safety. And Kael needed her free, needed her able to help him fight the curse that held him prisoner. "It's not what you think," she said finally, which was true enough, even if it wasn't the whole truth. "Then what is it?" Theron pressed. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're consorting with a potentially dangerous predator while our pack is falling apart." Before Aurelia could respond, a commotion erupted from the main hall. Shouts, the sound of furniture being overturned, and underneath it all, a voice raised in anger that made both of them freeze. "That's Elena," Theron said grimly, already moving toward the door. "And she sounds furious." They found the main hall in chaos. Elena Blackwood stood in the center of the room, her face flushed with rage as she faced off against Dr. Sarah Chun and several other pack members. Around them, chairs had been knocked over and papers scattered across the floor. "What's going on here?" Theron demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "She's lost her mind," Elena snarled, pointing an accusing finger at Dr. Chun. "She's actually suggesting we consider Magnus' offer." "I'm suggesting we consider all our options," Dr. Chun replied calmly, though Aurelia could see the tension in her shoulders. "We can't simply ignore the reality of our situation." "Our reality," Elena shot back, "is that we're the Silvercrest Pack. We don't bow to anyone, especially not to that ambitious snake, Magnus Ironwood." "And what exactly do you propose we do?" asked Thomas Greystone, one of the Pack's elders. "Fight a war we can't win? Watch our territory be carved up by every opportunistic alpha in the region?" "We wait for Kael to return," Elena declared, though even she seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. "It's been over a week," Dr. Chun said gently. "If he were coming back, he'd be here by now." "He's not dead," Elena interrupted fiercely. "I would know if he were dead. We all would." The truth of those words hung heavy in the air. The pack bond that connected all of them to their alpha would have shattered if Kael had died. The fact that it remained intact, albeit strangely muted, was the only thing keeping hope alive. "No one's saying he's dead," Theron said carefully. "But we have to face the possibility that something has happened to him. Something that might prevent him from returning." "Like what?" Elena demanded. "What could possibly keep an alpha from his pack?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Because the truth that their alpha had been transformed into a wolf by an immortal mage's curse was too impossible for any of them to imagine. "It doesn't matter what's happened," Thomas said finally. "What matters is that Magnus will be here tonight, and we need to decide how to respond to his offer." "There's nothing to decide," Elena snapped. "We refuse. We maintain our independence and wait for our alpha to return. And if he doesn't, Dr. Chun asked quietly. Do we watch our pack slowly disintegrate while we cling to pride? The argument continued, growing more heated with each exchange. Aurelia listened with growing despair, realizing that the pack was tearing itself apart from within. Without Kael's strong leadership to unite them, old rivalries and philosophical differences were rising to the surface. Through the soul bond, she felt Kael's anguish at hearing his pack in such turmoil. His frustration at being unable to help, unable to lead, was a constant ache that made her own heart hurt in sympathy. There is another option, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the argument. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her with expressions ranging from surprise to skepticism. Aurelia felt her cheeks burn under the scrutiny, but she forced herself to continue. What if someone else stepped forward to lead temporarily until the Alpha returns? Who? Elena asked with obvious disdain. Theron's the Beta, but he's not Alpha material. No offense, she added, glancing at Theron. None taken, Theron replied dryly. She's right. I'm an advisor, not a leader. Then who? Thomas pressed. We can't just appoint someone randomly. Aurelia took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. What about the Alpha's mate? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Elena laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. His mate. Elena's voice dripped with disbelief. You mean you? The wolfless girl who was publicly rejected. You think you have a right to lead this pack? I think, Aurelia said, her voice growing stronger despite the tremor in her hands, that the soul bond gives me certain rights. Rights that don't disappear just because the Alpha chose duty over love. The bond was rejected, Thomas pointed out, though his tone was more curious than dismissive. Publicly and completely. Was it? Aurelia challenged. Because I can still feel it. Can't you? That connection to our Alpha, muted but not broken. She saw the truth of her words reflected in their faces. They could all feel it. The strange persistent sense that Kael was still alive, still connected to them, even if they couldn't understand why the bond felt so different. Even if that's true, Dr. Chin said carefully, you have no experience leading, no training in pack politics or territorial negotiations. No, Aurelia agreed. But I have something else. I have the Alpha's trust. It was a lie, or at least a massive oversimplification of the complex truth. But through the soul bond, she felt Kael's sudden surge of hope and approval. He understood what she was trying to do, and he supported her completely. This is ridiculous, Elena declared. We're not going to hand leadership over to someone who can't even shift. Why not? The voice came from the doorway where Lady Ravenna stood with her arms crossed and her expression stern. Since when does the ability to shift determine one's worth as a leader? Lady Ravenna, Theron said respectfully. With all due respect, this is a pack matter. Is it? The old woman asked, stepping into the room. Because from where I stand, it looks like a pack tearing itself apart, while enemies gather at the gates. She moved to stand beside Aurelia, her presence lending weight to the younger woman's words. I've watched this girl grow up, Lady Ravenna continued. Watched her endure years of dismissal and contempt with grace and dignity. I've seen her show compassion to those who showed her none, courage in the face of rejection, and wisdom beyond her years. Pretty words, Elena said dismissively, but they don't change the fact that she's powerless. Are you so certain of that? Lady Ravenna asked, her eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement. Power comes in many forms, child. Not all of them involve claws and fangs. Before anyone could respond to that cryptic statement, another voice cut through the tension. What's all this noise about? Everyone turned to see Marcus Thornfield entering the hall. His expression was grim, and behind him came several other pack members, their faces bearing news that made Aurelia's heart sink. Magnus is here, Marcus announced early. His convoy just passed the outer markers. The room erupted in fresh chaos as pack members scrambled to prepare for the unexpected arrival. But through it all, Aurelia remained frozen in place, feeling the weight of destiny settling around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Through the soul bond, she felt Kael's sudden spike of alarm and protective fury. He was out there in the forest, trapped in wolf form, watching his pack face its greatest crisis without him. The frustration and helplessness radiating through their connection was almost overwhelming. "We need to decide," Theron said urgently. "Right now, how do we respond to Magnus as a united pack?" "As a united pack," Aurelia said firmly, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "Under whose leadership?" Elena demanded. Aurelia met her gaze steadily. "Under mine, as the Alpha's mate and the one person in this room who still maintains a clear connection to him." "This is insane," Elena protested, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Maybe," Dr. Chin said thoughtfully, "but it might also be our only chance." The debate that followed was brief but intense. In the end, it was Thomas Greystone who cast the deciding vote. "The girl has a point about the bond," he said slowly, "and we need someone to speak for us tonight. Someone who can't be accused of having personal ambitions for the Alpha position. Because she could never actually hold it," Elena muttered, but she didn't voice any further objections. "Then it's settled," Theron said, though he looked deeply uncomfortable with the decision. "Aurelia speaks for the pack tonight. As the Alpha's mate and the one person in this room who still maintains a clear connection to him." As the others dispersed to prepare for Magnus' arrival, Aurelia remained in the hall, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had just committed to. Through the soul bond, she felt Kael's complex mix of pride, worry, and desperate love. He believed in her, even if she wasn't sure she believed in herself. Lady Ravenna approached her as the room emptied, her expression unreadable. "You've set yourself on a dangerous path, child," the old woman said quietly. "Magnus is not a man to be underestimated. He's far more than he appears." "I know," Aurelia replied, "but what choice do I have? The pack is falling apart, and Kael will endure," Lady Ravenna said firmly. "The ritual last night strengthened him more than you know. But you need to be careful tonight. Magnus didn't come here just to make an offer. He came to assess our weaknesses, and now you've made yourself the most visible target." Before Aurelia could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the courtyard. Magnus Ironwood had arrived, and with him, the most crucial test of Aurelia's newfound authority. As she made her way to the main entrance, Aurelia felt the soul bond pulse with Kael's presence. Somewhere out there in the forest, her mate was watching, waiting, ready to protect her in whatever way he could, despite his cursed form. The thought gave her strength as she prepared to face the most dangerous Alpha in the region, knowing that the fate of her pack and possibly much more hung in the balance of the next few hours. Chapter 5. Magnus Ironwood was exactly what Aurelia had expected and somehow worse. Tall and broad-shouldered like most Alphas, he carried himself with the casual arrogance of a man who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome through force or cunning. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator sizing up potential prey. He arrived with a retinue of 6 warriors, all of them radiating the kind of controlled violence that spoke of extensive combat experience. They dismounted in the courtyard with military precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Quite the welcoming committee, Magnus observed as he approached the main entrance, where Aurelia waited with Theron and the pack senior members. His voice was smooth and cultured, but underneath the politeness lay something that made Aurelia's skin crawl. "Alpha Ironwood," Theron said formally. "Welcome to Silver Crest territory." Magnus' gaze swept over the assembled pack members before settling on Aurelia with obvious curiosity. "And you are?" she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the way his attention made her feel like a mouse being studied by a particularly intelligent cat. "I speak for the pack in Alpha Kael's absence." "Do you indeed?" Magnus' eyebrows rose in apparent amusement. "How unusual. I was under the impression that Kael had rejected his supposed mate quite publicly." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to wound and humiliate. Aurelia felt heat rise in her cheeks, but refused to look away from his penetrating stare. "The Alpha's personal decisions don't affect my commitment to this pack," she replied evenly. "How noble," Magnus said, though his tone suggested he found her nobility more amusing than admirable. "Shall we proceed inside? I'm eager to discuss the future of your leaderless pack." The emphasis on leaderless was subtle but unmistakable. Magnus was making it clear that he viewed the Silvercrest pack as weak, vulnerable, ripe for conquest. As they made their way into the main hall, Aurelia could feel the weight of his assessment, the way he cataloged every detail that might be useful in future negotiations or conflicts. The hall had been prepared for formal negotiations with chairs arranged in a circle and refreshments laid out on side tables. But the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm, and Aurelia could see the barely concealed hostility in her packmates' faces. "Now then," Magnus said once everyone was seated, "let's discuss the elephant in the room, shall we? Your Alpha has been missing for over a week with no word, no trace, no indication of when or if he might return." "Alpha Kael is not dead," Elena said sharply. "We would know if he were." "Of course," Magnus agreed smoothly. "The pact bond would have shattered, but there are fates worse than death, aren't there? Capture, imprisonment, transformation." His eyes glinted with something that might have been knowledge as he spoke the last word. Aurelia felt ice form in her veins. Did Magnus know something about Kael's curse? Was he somehow involved in what had happened? Through the soul bond, she felt Kael's sudden spike of alarm and rage. He had heard Magnus' words, and his reaction confirmed Aurelia's worst fears. This wasn't just a political opportunist taking advantage of their weakness. This was something far more sinister. This wasn't just a political opportunist taking advantage of their weakness. This was something far more sinister. "What are you suggesting?" Theron asked carefully. "I'm suggesting that your Alpha may have encountered something beyond his ability to handle," Magnus replied. "The supernatural world is full of dangers after all. Ancient powers that don't respect pack hierarchies or territorial boundaries. If you know something about what happened to Kael," Elena began, but Magnus cut her off with a raised hand. "I know many things," he said calmly, "but tonight I'm here to discuss solutions, not problems. Your pack is vulnerable without leadership. My pack is strong and well-established. A merger would benefit everyone involved." "You mean absorption?" Thomas Greystone said bluntly. "You want us to submit to your authority." "Such an ugly word, submit," Magnus mused. "I prefer to think of it as joining forces. Your pack members would be welcomed into mine. Your territory would be protected under my authority, and your bloodlines would be preserved through strategic marriages." "And what would you get out of this generous offer?" Aurelia asked, though she already knew the answer. Magnus smiled, and the expression was all teeth and no warmth. "Expanded territory, increased resources, and the satisfaction of preventing a power vacuum that could destabilize the entire region." "How altruistic of you," Dr. Chen said dryly. "I'm a practical man," Magnus replied without shame. "I see an opportunity to strengthen both our packs while preventing unnecessary conflict. Surely that's preferable to watching your pack slowly disintegrate while you wait for a leader who may never return." The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Aurelia could see the doubt creeping into her packmates' faces. The growing realization that Magnus might be right about their prospects without Kael. "And if we refuse?" she asked. Magnus' expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Then you continue as you are, growing weaker by the day, until eventually someone less diplomatic than myself decides to take what you can no longer protect." The threat was clear, even wrapped in polite language. "Submit willingly or be conquered by force." "We need time to consider your offer," Theron said diplomatically. "Of course," Magnus agreed. "But not too much time. The longer you remain leaderless, the more vulnerable you become. I'd hate to see something unfortunate happen while you deliberate." As the meeting continued, Aurelia found herself studying Magnus with growing unease. There was something about him that went beyond simple political ambition, something that reminded her uncomfortably of Lady Ravenna's description of Adrian Blackthorne. The same cold calculation, the same sense of ancient power barely contained beneath a civilized facade. When the formal negotiations finally ended, Magnus lingered as his retinue prepared to depart. He approached Aurelia with the casual confidence of a predator who knew his prey couldn't escape. "You're an interesting choice for a spokesperson," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "The rejected mate, speaking for a pack that barely tolerates her presence." "I serve my pack's interests," Aurelia replied, refusing to be baited. "Do you?" Magnus asked. "Or are you serving your own? After all, if Kael never returns, you might find yourself in a position of permanent authority." Quite a rise for someone who was publicly humiliated just over a week ago. The accusation hit like a physical blow, but Aurelia kept her expression neutral. "My motivations are my own concern," she said. "Indeed, they are," Magnus agreed. "But I wonder, have you considered what might happen if your Alpha does return? Do you think he'll be grateful for your leadership? Or might he see it as an unwelcome usurpation of his authority?" Before Aurelia could respond, Magnus stepped back with that cold smile. "Something to think about, perhaps," he said. "Until we meet again, Miss Nightwhisper." As Magnus and his retinue departed, Aurelia remained in the courtyard, his words echoing in her mind. Through the soul bond, she felt Kael's fury at the other Alpha's veiled threats, his desperate wish that he could protect her from the political machinations swirling around them. But underneath his anger, she sensed something else, a growing urgency that spoke of time running out. The curse was still eating away at his humanity, and despite the protection ritual, she could feel him slipping a little further away each day. They needed answers, and they needed them soon, because Magnus' visit had made one thing crystal clear. The Silvercrest Pack's enemies were circling, and without their Alpha to protect them, they were running out of time. As she made her way back into the estate, Aurelia's resolve hardened. Tomorrow, she would seek out Adrian Blackthorn, the immortal mage who held the key to Kael's curse. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was their only hope. Because she would not let Magnus Ironwood destroy her pack, and she would not let Kael disappear forever into the wild heart of the wolf. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, she would find a way to bring him home. Chapter 6. The emergency council meeting was called for the following evening, as storm clouds gathered overhead and the wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Word had spread quickly through the pack about Magnus' ultimatum, and tensions were running higher than ever. Some members favored accepting his offer, viewing it as their only chance for survival. Others, led by Elena, insisted they should fight rather than submit to foreign rule. Aurelia stood before the assembled council in the great hall, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The formal council consisted of the pack's elders, senior warriors, and key advisors. But tonight, nearly every adult member of the pack had crowded into the space. The air was thick with anxiety and barely contained arguments. We all heard Magnus' offer. Thomas Greystone began, his weathered face grave. "The question before us is simple. Do we accept his protection in exchange for our independence? Or do we refuse and face the consequences?" "There's nothing to discuss," Elena declared from her position near the front of the room. "We are the Silvercrest Pack. We don't bow to anyone." "Pretty words," Dr. Chen replied coolly. "But they won't protect us from Magnus' warriors if he decides to take our territory by force." "Then we fight," Elena shot back. "We faced threats before. Not without our Alpha," Marcus Thornfield pointed out grimly. "And not against someone like Magnus Ironwood. His pack is twice our size, and his warriors are battle-tested." The argument that followed was heated but predictable, with the same positions being restated in increasingly frustrated tones. Aurelia listened to it all with growing impatience, feeling Kael's anguish through the soul bond as he heard his pack tearing itself apart. Finally, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough." The single word, spoken with quiet authority, brought an immediate hush to the room. Aurelia felt a moment of surprise at her own boldness. But the strengthened soul bond was giving her access to something she had never experienced before. The confidence that came from knowing she spoke not just for herself, but for her mate. "We're not going to solve this by shouting at each other," she continued, moving to stand in the center of the circle. "And we're not going to make this decision based on fear or pride." "Then what do you suggest?" Thomas asked, his tone respectful but skeptical. Aurelia took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. I suggest we stop pretending that we're leaderless. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Elena laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. You can't be serious. You think you can just declare yourself our alpha? Not alpha, Aurelia corrected calmly. Luna, the alpha's mate, speaking with his authority in his absence. You were rejected, Elena reminded her cruelly. Publicly and completely. Was I? Aurelia challenged. Because I can still feel it. Can't you all feel it? That connection to our alpha, stronger tonight than it's been since his disappearance. She saw the truth of her words reflected in their faces. The pack bond was indeed stronger tonight, pulsing with a vitality that spoke of their alpha's continued existence and his approval of what was happening. Even if that's true, Dr. Chun said carefully, you have no experience leading a pack, no training in the complexities of supernatural politics. No, Aurelia agreed. But I have something else. I have the alpha's trust. It was a lie, or at least a massive oversimplification of the complex truth. But through the soul bond, she felt Kael's sudden surge of hope and approval. He understood what she was trying to do, and he supported her completely. This is ridiculous, Elena declared. We're not going to hand leadership over to someone who can't even shift. Why not? The voice came from the doorway, where Lady Ravenna stood with her arms crossed and her expression stern. Since when does the ability to shift determine one's worth as a leader? Lady Ravenna, Theron said respectfully. With all due respect, this is a pack matter. Is it? The old woman asked, stepping into the room. Because from where I stand, it looks like a pack tearing itself apart, while enemies gather at the gates. She moved to stand beside Aurelia, her presence lending unexpected weight to the younger woman's words. I've watched this girl grow up, Lady Ravenna continued. Watch her endure years of dismissal and contempt with grace and dignity. I've seen her show compassion to those who showed her none, courage in the face of rejection, and wisdom beyond her years. Pretty words, Elena said dismissively, but they don't change the fact that she's powerless. Are you so certain of that? Lady Ravenna asked, her eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement. Power comes in many forms, child. Not all of them involve claws and fangs. Before anyone could respond to that cryptic statement, the storm outside intensified. Lightning flickered across the windows, and a strange electricity seemed to fill the great hall. Aurelia felt the silver light beneath her skin pulse in response to her emotions and the power of the moment. We need to decide, Theron said urgently, sensing the shifting dynamics in the room. Right now, how do we respond to Magnus as a united pack? As a united pack, Aurelia said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that surprised them all. Under whose leadership? Elena demanded. Aurelia met her gaze steadily. Under mine, as the Alpha's mate and the one person in this room who still maintains a clear connection to him. This is insane, Elena protested. But her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Maybe, Dr. Chun said thoughtfully, but might also be our only chance. The debate that followed was brief but intense. In the end, it was Thomas Greystone who cast the deciding vote. The girl has a point about the bond, he said slowly, and we need someone to speak for us. Someone who can't be accused of having personal ambitions for the alpha position. Because she could never actually hold it, Elena muttered, but she didn't voice any further objections. Then it's settled, Theron said, though he looked deeply uncomfortable with the decision. Aurelia speaks for the pack tonight. As the Alpha's mate and the one person in this room who still maintains a clear connection to him. As the others dispersed to prepare for whatever came next, Aurelia remained in the great hall with Lady Ravenna. The old woman approached with an expression that mixed pride with deep concern. You've committed yourself to a dangerous path, Lady Ravenna said quietly. Magnus won't take kindly to being defied by someone he views as powerless. Then I'll have to prove him wrong about my power, Aurelia replied, though she wasn't entirely sure how she was going to do that. Indeed, you will, Lady Ravenna agreed. Which brings us to the matter we discussed yesterday. If you're going to break Kael's curse, you'll need to confront the one who cast it, Adrian Blackthorn. Aurelia felt a chill run down her spine. The very same. and I'm afraid that meeting him will be far more dangerous than facing Magnus. Why? What exactly is he? Lady Ravenna was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant, as if she were looking back through centuries of memory. Adrian is old, child. Older than this pack, older than most of the supernatural bloodlines in this region. He's a mage of immense power, but more than that, he's a collector. A collector of what? Aurelia asked. Debts favor souls, some say, though I've never been able to confirm that particular rumor. Lady Ravenna's expression grew darker. He doesn't curse people randomly. Every spell he casts, every bargain he makes, serve a larger purpose. If he transformed Kael, it was because he wanted something from your mate or from you. From me? But I'm nobody. I have no power, no influence, nothing he could possibly want. Don't you? Lady Ravenna asked pointedly. You're the mate of one of the most powerful alphas in the region. You've just claimed leadership of a pack in crisis. And you have abilities you haven't even begun to explore. What abilities? I can't shift. I can't fight. I can. You can love, Lady Ravenna interrupted gently. Completely, selflessly, without reservation. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How powerful? Before Aurelia could respond, the old woman continued. There are magics in this world that can only be broken by true love, child. Ancient spells that laugh at strength and cunning, but crumble before genuine sacrifice. If Adrian cursed Kael, it may be because he knew that only you could break that curse. But why would he want it broken? Aurelia asked. That, Lady Ravenna said grimly, is what you'll have to ask him. But be warned, Adrian never gives anything away for free. If he helps you break the curse, he'll expect payment, and his prices are always higher than they first appear. The rest of the night passed in preparation and growing anxiety. Aurelia retreated to her room, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she lay awake, feeling the soul bond pulse with Kael's presence in the distant forest. She could sense his struggle, his fading hope, his desperate love for her and their pack. By dawn, her decision was made. She would seek out Adrian Blackthorn and do whatever it took to break Kael's curse. The consequences of failure were unthinkable. The consequences of the bargain she might have to make were terrifying, but there was no other choice. The fate of her pack, her mate, and possibly the entire supernatural world depended on what happened in the days ahead. And Aurelia Nightwhisper, the girl who had been rejected and humiliated, would not fail. Not now. Not when everything that mattered hung in the balance. The end.